The wind howled across the high plains like a pack of hungry wolves that night. Snow fell thick, covering every trail and fence post in white silence. Inside a small cabin made of rough logs, a man named Jacob sat close to a dying fire. He was a cowboy, living alone after years of driving cattle, fixing fences, and chasing seasons across the land. His horse Dusty was in the shed outside, stamping and snorting against the cold. The storm had started hours ago, and Jacob knew it would last through the night. He was used to nights like this, cold, empty, and quiet. Loneliness had become his only companion since the death of his younger brother 2 winters ago. He had learned to live without voices, without laughter, and without the warmth of another human being. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste filling his mouth as he stared into the fire, lost in thought. Then, over the howl of the storm, came a faint sound, so soft at first that he thought he imagined it. But it came again, a knock. Not strong but desperate. Jacob froze for a second, wondering if it was the wind. Then came another louder, trembling knock on the cabin door. He stood up, grabbed his rifle out of instinct, and slowly moved toward the sound. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but cautious. No answer. Only the wind and snow. He opened the door a crack and the icy air rushed in, biting his face. Then he saw her. A woman stood there, shivering from head to toe. Her clothes were soaked. Her long dark hair stuck to her face and her lips were blue from the cold. She looked like she had been walking through the storm for hours. Her eyes met his, wide, frightened, and pleading. Jacob didn't need to ask who she was. The patterns on her torn blanket and the beads on her neck told him she was Apache. He had seen those ornaments before when riding near the reservation. "Please," she whispered weakly, her voice nearly gone. I can't go farther." Jacob lowered his rifle instantly. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. She stumbled through the doorway, almost falling. He caught her before she hit the floor. Her skin was ice cold and her fingers stiff like frozen wood. He helped her to the chair near the fire and closed the door tight behind them. She sat there trembling, holding her arms close to her chest. Jacob threw 2 more logs on the fire and hurried to heat water. He handed her a blanket from his bed and a tin cup of hot coffee. She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. Jacob nodded. "Storm caught you out there, huh?" She nodded slowly, still trying to warm her hands. "I was walking to my people's camp. I lost the trail when the snow came. I thought I'd die out there." Jacob looked at her closely. She was young, maybe in her 20s, her features strong but soft. There was pride in her eyes even through her exhaustion. Her clothes were torn, her boots thin, and it was clear she hadn't eaten well in days. "You're lucky you found my cabin," Jacob said quietly. "This storm's a killer. You'd have frozen before morning." She nodded again but didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the fire, lost in the dancing flames. For the next hour, the cabin filled with the crackle of burning wood and the quiet rhythm of the storm outside. Slowly, the woman's trembling eased. Jacob gave her a bowl of soup he had left from earlier. She hesitated for a moment as if unsure if she could trust him, then ate with small, careful bites. Jacob didn't speak much. He didn't want to scare her with questions. He just sat by the window listening to the storm and watching her from the corner of his eye. He had helped travelers before, miners, soldiers, ranch hands, but never a woman and never an Apache woman. When she finally looked up, her eyes had softened. "You saved me," she said quietly. Jacob shook his head. "Just opened the door, that's all." "No," she said firmly. "You gave me life again." He didn't know what to say to that. He only nodded and poked the fire with a stick. Outside, the wind screamed like a ghost, shaking the walls. Snow piled higher against the door. The night wasn't letting up. After a while, she pulled the blanket tighter and looked around. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yeah," Jacob replied. "Been that way for a long time." "Why?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Guess I got tired of chasing things that don't last. Work, people, promises. Out here, at least I know what to expect." She studied his face for a long moment, then looked down. "A lonely man," she said almost to herself. Jacob shrugged. "Better than being dead." The fire flickered low, shadows crawling across the walls. Hours passed. The wind never stopped. When Jacob checked the window again, the snow was halfway up the glass. "Looks like we're stuck till morning," he said. The woman didn't answer at first. Then she stood up slowly, wrapped in the blanket, and walked to his bed in the corner. She looked at it, then turned to him. Her voice was calm but serious. "There's only one bed," she said. Jacob hesitated. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said quickly. She shook her head. "The floor is cold. You will freeze, and so will I." "I'll be fine," he said, trying to smile. But she stepped closer. Her eyes held his with quiet strength. "No," she said. "You saved my life. Now we both live or both die. We share the bed or we both freeze." Jacob froze, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to someone speaking so directly. He could see she wasn't afraid, just determined. It wasn't a demand of pride, it was survival. He looked away, scratching his neck. "Ma'am, my name is Ayanna," she said. He nodded awkwardly. "Ayanna." "Look, it's just not right." "It is life," she interrupted softly. "I do not ask for shame, only warmth." Her words carried a quiet dignity that silenced him. The storm roared again, shaking the cabin walls. Jacob sighed deeply and looked toward the fire, which was burning low. He knew she was right. The temperature was dropping fast. He could already feel the cold creeping through the cracks in the wood. Finally, he stood up. "All right," he said quietly. "You take the bed. I'll keep the fire going," but Ayanna didn't move. "You will die on that floor," she said. "I will not let that happen." Jacob looked at her again, and something in her expression, half pride, half kindness, made him stop arguing. He walked toward the bed, pulling off his boots. "You stay on that side," he said carefully. She nodded once. Agreed. They lay down, both stiff and silent, wrapped in separate blankets. The storm outside raged harder than before. At first, neither could sleep. Jacob stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind batter the walls. Then he felt the mattress move slightly as Ayanna shifted closer, drawn by the need for warmth. Her back brushed against his arm. She whispered softly, "Still cold." Jacob hesitated, then wrapped an arm lightly over her shoulders, keeping the blanket snug. She didn't pull away. For the first time in years, Jacob felt something stir in his chest, a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Minutes turned into hours. The storm outside howled without mercy, but inside the cabin, the two strangers drifted into uneasy sleep, bound not by trust or love, but by the simple, desperate will to survive. When dawn came, the world outside was buried in white silence. Jacob opened his eyes to see Ayanna still beside him, her breathing soft, her face calm. For a moment he just watched her, unsure of what the day would bring or what this night had already changed. And somewhere deep inside, a man who had long forgotten what it felt like to care began to remember again. The morning light came slow, pushing through the frost on the window like a weak candle flame. The cabin was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire and the wind whispering outside. Jacob woke first. For a long moment he didn't move. The night came back to him. The storm, the knocking, the woman, and her calm but firm words that had saved them both from freezing. He turned slightly. Ayanna was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful now. In the soft light he saw details he hadn't noticed before. Her long lashes, the faint marks of hardship on her hands, the way her dark hair fell across her cheek. She didn't look like a stranger anymore. She looked like someone who had fought hard to survive. Jacob slowly sat up, careful not to wake her. The fire was nearly out, so he added more wood and poured water into the kettle. Outside, the snow was piled so high he couldn't even see the fence. The storm had buried everything in silence. Ayanna stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment, confusion showed on her face as she remembered where she was. Then her eyes found Jacob and she relaxed slightly. "The storm is over?" she asked softly. "Looks like it," Jacob said. "But we're snowed in. No one's going anywhere today." She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Her hair was a bit messy, her face pale but calm. She gave a faint smile. "Then we are still alive." Jacob nodded. "Thanks to you insisting I don't sleep on the floor." Her eyes warmed a little. "You would have frozen," she said. "I was not wrong." "No," he admitted. "You weren't." He poured her a cup of coffee and passed it to her. She took it, her hands brushing his for a second. There was a quiet comfort between them now, the kind that grows in silence and shared hardship. For a while they just sat there, listening to the sound of the wind outside. The world felt small and still, only the cabin, the fire, and the two of them. Jacob finally spoke. "So where were you headed before the storm hit?" She looked into the fire as if searching for words. To my people's camp near the river. My brother was hurt. I went to trade for medicine from the town, but soldiers stopped me. They said no Apache woman could travel alone. They chased me. I hid in the woods for days. Jacob frowned. You mean they forced you out in this weather? She nodded. They took my horse and my things. I walked. Then the snow came. He clenched his jaw, anger flickering in his eyes. That's no way to treat anyone. She gave a small, sad smile. To them, I am not anyone. I am only an Apache. Jacob looked away, ashamed. He had seen the way settlers and soldiers talked about her people. He never agreed with it, but he had never done anything to stop it either. Now seeing her here half frozen and hungry made him realize how wrong it all was. He finally said, You're safe here. No one will bother you. She nodded, her eyes grateful. You are a strange man, Jacob. You live alone, but you still have kindness. He chuckled quietly. Guess loneliness leaves room for that. The day passed slowly. They worked together to clear snow from the doorway, take care of Dusty the horse, and fetch firewood. Ayanna moved with quiet grace even though her strength hadn't fully returned. She was used to hardship. Jacob could see that in the way she carried herself. At noon, the sun came out, turning the snow into a blinding white sea. Ayanna stood outside the cabin wrapped in his coat, breathing deeply. It is beautiful, she said softly. Jacob stood beside her. Yeah, he agreed. Beautiful and deadly. She smiled faintly. Like life. He looked at her, surprised by her words. You sound like someone who's seen too much of both. She didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, When I was a child, soldiers came to our village. My mother told me to hide under the floorboards. When I came out, everything was gone. Since then, I have walked many paths, some through peace, some through pain. Jacob didn't know what to say. Her words carried the weight of loss that few could understand. He wanted to tell her that not all men were cruel, that not everyone saw her as less, but he didn't know if that would comfort her or just sound empty, so he said the only honest thing he could. I'm sorry. She turned her head toward him, her eyes deep and steady. You did not do it, she said gently. But you listen. That is enough. They went back inside before the cold bit too hard. Jacob cooked what little food he had left, beans, a bit of bread, and dried meat. They shared it quietly, sitting by the fire as the daylight faded. Later that evening, as the wind started to rise again, Jacob fixed the cracks in the window and checked the door latch. He turned to find Ayanna watching him. You take care of everything, she said. Even a stranger, he smiled. That's just what you do when you live out here. You help folks when they need it. She tilted her head. And when you need help? Jacob paused, caught off guard. Guess I don't ask for it much. That is a lonely way, she said softly. He didn't answer. He just looked into the fire again, lost in thought. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. The fire's glow flickered against the log walls. Jacob handed her an extra blanket, but she shook her head. The bed is warmer, she said, her tone calm but gentle. He gave a half smile. You're not giving up on that rule, are you? She shook her head slightly. It saved us once. It will again. He sighed and gave in. All right, but you take most of the blanket this time. They lay down again, the same careful distance between them, but this time the silence felt different. Not cold or awkward, just quiet understanding. Outside, the snow fell softer now, like a whisper instead of a roar. Jacob stared at the ceiling, thinking about her story, about how much she had lost and how strong she still was. He thought about himself, too. How many years he had spent avoiding people, avoiding pain. Now in one stormy night, a stranger had brought warmth back into his life. Ayanna shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing his arm. You are not sleeping, she said softly. No, he admitted. Too many thoughts. Then think of good things, she said. Think of spring. He smiled faintly in the dark. Haven't thought of spring in years. Then start now, she whispered. Her words stayed with him as he closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the emptiness of the plains pressing in on him. He felt something else, hope, small but real. When morning came again, the storm had finally passed for good. The sun shone bright, turning the snow into silver light. Jacob opened the door, feeling the fresh air against his face. It was quiet, peaceful. The world seemed new. Ayanna stood beside him, her blanket wrapped tight, her eyes shining as she looked over the endless white land. "The trail will open soon," she said. Jacob's heart sank a little. "You mean you'll be leaving?" she nodded. "My brother still needs me." He looked away, pretending to check the fire. "I see," she stepped closer. "But I will not forget you, Jacob of the lonely cabin. The man who gave warmth to a stranger." He turned back to her, meeting her eyes. "And I won't forget you either, Ayana of the storm." They stood there in silence, the sun rising behind them, melting away the last traces of the storm. Two lives that had crossed by chance now carried a bond neither had expected, and though both knew she would soon have to leave, something unspoken lingered between them, something born not from words or promises, but from one long, snowbound night when a lonely cowboy and an Apache woman had shared the same fire, the same bed, and the same fragile human hope to live another day. The next morning brought calm skies and a quiet that felt strange after so many days of storm. The snow glittered like glass under the sun, stretching far across the valley. Jacob stepped outside with his hat pulled low, his boots sinking deep into the snow. He could see the world again, the mountains, the frozen creek, and the distant line of trees. Behind him, Ayana stepped out of the cabin, still wrapped in her blanket. Her dark hair shone under the sunlight, and her eyes squinted at the brightness. For the first time since he had met her, she looked peaceful. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Jacob nodded. "It is, but it's going to take a week before the snow melts enough to travel." She turned to him. "Then I will help you with the chores. I will not sit idle." He smiled a little. "You don't need to work, Ayana. You're my guest." She lifted her chin with quiet pride. "I do not take without giving." He saw that her words came from the same place her strength did. She wasn't used to being helped. She was used to surviving, standing tall even when life pushed her down. He respected that more than he could say, so they worked together. She fetched water from the barrel, carried firewood, and helped feed the horse. Her movements were steady and graceful. Jacob watched her with a kind of quiet admiration. He had never met anyone like her before, someone so strong but gentle at the same time. In the afternoon, when the sun warmed the air, they sat on the porch together. Ayana mended one of his torn shirts with a needle and thread she found in his chest. Jacob whittled a piece of wood, shaping it into a small horse. The sound of their quiet work filled the air like soft music. After a while, Ayana spoke without looking up. "You live far from people. Do you not miss them?" Jacob thought for a long time before answering. "Maybe once I did. But every time I got close to folks, something went wrong. People leave or they die or they change. Out here, it's just me and the land. The land doesn't lie." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "The land also does not speak back," she said gently. Jacob chuckled. "That's true," she smiled faintly. "Even the earth needs voices to make it alive." Her words sank deep into him. For a long time they said nothing. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. That night after supper, Ayana sat by the fire while Jacob played a quiet tune on his old harmonica. It was a lonely, haunting sound that filled the cabin like a memory. She listened with her eyes closed, her head tilted slightly, as if the notes spoke a language she understood. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and whispered, "It sounds like the wind in the canyon." Jacob smiled. "That's what it is." "A song for the wind," she nodded slowly. "It carries sadness." He stared into the flames. "Guess that's what I've got most of." She studied his face for a long time. "Sadness is heavy when you carry it alone." He didn't answer, but something in his chest tightened. Days passed and the snow began to melt. Each day the light lasted longer and small birds returned to the trees. The world was waking up again. But with every sunrise, Jacob felt a quiet fear grow inside him, the fear that Ayana would soon leave. One afternoon, he found her standing by the ridge behind the cabin, looking toward the far horizon. He knew what she was thinking. "Road'll be clear in 2 days," he said softly. She didn't turn. "I know." He walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. "Your brother, he'll be waiting." "Yes," she said. "If he still lives," Jacob frowned. "Don't talk like that. He's alive. You'll get to him." She looked down at the snow. "You have kindness, Jacob, but you do not know the world I live in. Sometimes hope is all we have, and even that fades." He wanted to say something, to promise her it would be all right, but he knew he couldn't make such promises. So he stood beside her in silence, both of them looking at the wide white valley that stretched to the horizon. That evening, while she packed a small bundle of things, Jacob fixed her a pouch of food, dried meat, biscuits, and some coffee beans. He placed it on the table without saying a word. She looked at it and then at him. "You have already done too much." "Not enough," he said quietly. "You saved my life that night as much as I saved yours." "Maybe more," she smiled softly. "We both lived because we shared warmth." He nodded. "Yeah, that's the truth." The next morning, the sky was clear blue. The snow had melted into soft patches, and the trail down the valley was open again. Jacob saddled Dusty and helped Ayanna tie her bundle to the saddle. She moved slowly as if every motion hurt. When she turned to him, her eyes were bright but sad. "You have been good to me, Jacob. My heart remembers." He looked at her, his voice low. "You don't have to go so soon. The trail's still rough." "Another day won't hurt," she shook her head. "Every day I wait, my brother may fade more." "I cannot," he swallowed hard. "Then I'll ride with you." She blinked in surprise. "You would leave your home?" "I'll see you safe," he said simply. "That's all." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached out, touching his arm gently. "No, this is your place. The land knows you. My path is not yours." Her touch lingered for a moment before she stepped back. She mounted the horse, her blanket fluttering in the cold wind. Jacob stood beside her, holding the reins loosely. "At least wait till the sun's higher," he said. "There's still ice in the valley." She nodded, understanding it wasn't just about the trail. It was about him not wanting her to go. When the sun finally climbed, she looked down at him one last time. "The storm brought me to your door. Maybe the Great Spirit wanted it so. I will not forget," he nodded, his jaw tight. "You find your brother!" "You hear me? Don't you stop till you do." She smiled faintly. "You speak like a warrior." He gave a short laugh. "Just an old cowboy trying to sound brave." Ayanna took a deep breath, then tugged the reins. The horse started forward, its hooves crunching the snow. She rode down the slope slowly, her figure growing smaller against the white valley. Jacob watched until she disappeared between the trees. Then the silence returned, deep, heavy, and endless. He stood there a long time, the wind cold against his face. For the first time in years, the cabin behind him felt truly empty. That night, he sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair across from him. Her blanket was still folded neatly on it. He reached out, touching it softly. The faint scent of her hair lingered there like a memory refusing to fade. He picked up his harmonica and played again, the same song as before, but this time, it sounded different. There was something new in the notes, something softer, warmer, and though he was alone, Jacob knew the storm had given him something he didn't even know he had lost: hope. He didn't know if he would ever see Ayanna again. Maybe she would return one day. Maybe she wouldn't. But somewhere out there she was alive, riding through the valley under the same sky. And that was enough to make him smile through the quiet tears he didn't try to hide. Weeks passed and the winter slowly began to fade. The ice on the creeks melted. The trees started to show tiny green buds and birds returned with their songs. But Jacob still felt the silence inside his cabin heavier than before. Every sound reminded him of her. The creak of the floorboards, the hiss of the fire, even the soft rustle of the blanket she had used. He kept himself busy, fixing fences, clearing the path, and tending to his horse, but his thoughts often drifted back to the woman with dark eyes and quiet strength. He wondered if she had made it safely to her people. He hoped her brother had lived. Sometimes at night, when he sat by the fire, he caught himself looking toward the door, half expecting another soft knock in the storm. But the door stayed closed and the wind only whispered through the cracks. One morning, Jacob saddled his horse and rode toward the nearest town for supplies. The trail was muddy from melting snow and the sky was heavy with clouds. He didn't speak to anyone much when he got to town. He bought flour, coffee, bullets, and a few cans of beans. But as he was about to leave, he overheard two men talking outside the general store. "Did you hear about that trouble near the river?" one said. "Some soldiers raided an Apache camp. They said there was a woman there who tried to stop them." "Got herself hurt?" Jacob's hand froze on the saddle strap. "What did you just say?" he asked sharply. The men looked at him, surprised. "You know them?" Jacob's voice was low. "Just tell me where." "Near the South River Bend," the man said. 2 days' ride from here." Jacob didn't wait to hear more. He rode out fast, the wind cold on his face. Dusty's hooves hit the trail hard. splashing through puddles and mud. He rode until sunset, camped briefly, then rode again at dawn. The thought of Ayana in danger burned in his chest like fire. By the second evening he reached the river. Smoke still lingered in the air and the land smelled of ashes. Broken huts and footprints marked what had once been a camp. He climbed off his horse and walked slowly among the ruins. "Ayana," he called, his voice echoing across the valley. "Ayana, are you here?" There was no answer. Only the soft rush of the river and the distant cry of a hawk. Then he saw movement behind a fallen tree. Jacob hurried over and found an old man sitting against the trunk, wrapped in a torn blanket. His face was lined with pain, his hair gray and thin. "Please," Jacob said, kneeling. "I'm looking for a woman, Apache. Her name's Ayana." The old man looked up, weak but aware. "You are the white man from the mountains," he said slowly. Jacob blinked in surprise. "You know me?" The old man nodded faintly. "Ayana spoke of you. She said you were kind." Jacob's heart jumped. "Where is she?" The old man pointed toward the trees. "They took her. The soldiers. She tried to protect her brother. They struck her, then dragged her away." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Which way?" The man lifted a trembling hand toward the west. "Toward the fort." Jacob pressed his hat down and stood. "Hold on. I'll bring her back." The old man caught his sleeve weakly. "Be careful, Cowboy. The fort is guarded." Jacob nodded once. "So am I." He mounted Dusty and rode west. The sun fell behind the hills, painting the sky red and gold. He rode through the night, his heart heavy with worry. He remembered her words, her courage, her quiet smile. The thought of her locked away, hurt or scared, made his blood boil. By dawn, he saw the fort in the distance, a small wooden post with a flag flapping in the cold wind. He stopped behind a ridge, studying it carefully. 2 soldiers stood near the gate, rifles on their shoulders. Jacob knew he couldn't walk in and demand her release. He had to be smart. He waited until nightfall, when the guards grew lazy and the lamps burned low. Then he crept closer, leading Dusty quietly along the dark edge of the fence. He slipped through a gap in the back wall, crouching low. Inside, a few soldiers slept near the fire, their guns resting beside them. He moved like a shadow between the tents, searching for her. Then he heard a faint cough. He turned his head toward a small wooden shed near the corner of the yard. He walked to it and peered inside through a crack. There she was. Ayana sat on the floor, her hands bound, her face pale but calm. Even in that cold place, she looked strong, her spirit unbroken. Jacob's chest tightened with relief and anger all at once. He whispered through the crack, "Ayana." Her head snapped up. For a moment, disbelief filled her eyes. "Jacob?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Keep quiet. I'm getting you out." She shook her head. "No, they will kill you." "Not if I move fast," he said softly. He looked around, found a loose board, and pulled it off quietly. The nails creaked but didn't snap. He slipped inside and cut the ropes with his knife. Her wrists were bruised. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her eyes wet. He smiled a little. "You didn't ask me to." "But I couldn't do nothing." They slipped out the back just as one of the soldiers turned over in his sleep. Jacob led her to Dusty, helped her climb up, and swung into the saddle behind her. Then they rode into the dark woods before the alarm could be raised. The night air was cold, the moon high above them. Ayana leaned weakly against him, her breath trembling. Jacob urged the horse faster until the fort lights disappeared behind them. When they finally stopped near a small creek miles away, Jacob helped her down. She was shaking from exhaustion. He built a quick fire and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said softly. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You came for me, why?" He looked into the flames. "Because I owed you more than one night of kindness. Because you gave me something I didn't know I'd lost." "What did I give you?" she asked weakly. "Something to care about again." For a long time neither of them spoke. The fire crackled and the stars shone bright above them. Slowly she reached out and touched his hand. "I thought I would never see you again," she said. Jacob looked at her, his eyes soft. "Guess the storm wasn't finished with us yet." She gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe not." As the fire warmed them, Jacob looked at her face, so brave even after all she had endured. He thought about how the world had treated her and how little she deserved that pain. He wanted to tell her that she wasn't alone anymore, but the words stayed in his heart. Instead, he said quietly, "Rest now." We'll head north in the morning. She nodded and leaned closer to the fire, her eyelids heavy. Jacob sat beside her, keeping watch. He knew soldiers would be searching by dawn. He didn't care. He had found her, and he wasn't going to lose her again. The night passed slowly, filled with the soft sound of crackling wood and the distant cry of wolves. As the first light touched the horizon, Ayanna stirred awake. Jacob stood and saddled the horse again. "We'll ride through the hills," he said. "They won't find us there." She nodded weakly. "Where will we go?" "Someplace safe," he said. "Someplace you can heal." She looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. "Then I will follow." And as the sun rose over the quiet land, the lonely cowboy and the Apache woman rode together once more. Two souls brought together by storm, torn apart by fate and now bound again by courage and something deeper, neither dared yet to name. The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the land with soft gold. Jacob and Ayanna rode side by side, their horses' hooves leaving tracks through the dew-covered grass. Behind them, the fort was far away now, only a memory. Ahead, the mountains stood tall and quiet, promising safety and peace. Ayanna leaned slightly on Jacob, still weak from her wounds. Her hands gripped the saddle loosely, and her eyes stayed half closed. Every few miles, Jacob stopped to let her rest and drink from the stream. He didn't speak much, but every time she looked at him, she saw worry in his eyes, worry mixed with something gentler. When the sun climbed higher, they reached a small valley hidden between two ridges. A stream ran through it, and pine trees gave shade. Jacob dismounted and helped Ayanna down carefully. She winced when her feet touched the ground. "We'll stop here," he said softly. "You need time to heal." She nodded faintly. "I will not slow you." He smiled a little. "You're not slowing me. You're the reason I'm still moving." Ayanna looked at him quietly, unsure what to say. There was truth in his eyes that made her chest ache. Jacob built a small camp under the trees and started a fire. He cooked beans and coffee while she rested on a blanket. The warmth returned to her cheeks little by little. When he handed her the tin cup, she smiled weakly. "You always take care of everything," he shrugged. "Guess I'm just used to looking after what matters." She sipped slowly. "And what matters to you, Jacob?" He paused. For a moment he looked out at the wide land around them. Used to be, it was just the ranch, the horse, the work. Nothing else, but now, I guess that's changed. Her eyes softened. "Because of me?" He looked back at her. "Because of a storm that brought someone who made this place feel alive again." The silence between them carried warmth instead of distance. The soft rustle of the wind and the crackle of fire filled the air. As the days passed, Ayanna grew stronger. She learned to walk again without pain, helped gather wood, and even laughed softly when Jacob joked about his clumsy cooking. The color returned to her face, and her spirit, though tired, began to shine again. One afternoon, as they sat by the stream, she washed her hands in the cool water. Jacob watched her from a short distance, his hat tilted low to hide his expression. She noticed and smiled. "You watch like a guard," she teased gently. He grinned. "Old habit. Just making sure you don't wander off and leave me behind again." Her smile faded slightly and she looked at the water. "I never wanted to leave you, Jacob. I had to," he nodded. "I know. You did what was right." "I'd have done the same." She glanced up. "You came for me anyway." He looked at her, his voice steady. "You'd have done the same for me, too." Ayanna's eyes glistened in the sunlight. "Yes," she said softly. "I would have." That evening, the sky turned crimson and purple. They sat close to the fire, their shoulders almost touching. Jacob told her about his brother, how they used to ride together and dream of owning land by the river. She listened quietly, her eyes full of sympathy. When he finished, she said, "You carry your brother's spirit with you. He is not gone. He rides with you still." Jacob looked at her in surprise. "You really believe that?" She nodded. "The wind carries those we have loved. You just have to listen close enough." Her words touched him deeply. For the first time, he felt peace about his brother's death. Maybe she was right. Maybe the lost never really left. Later that night, when the stars filled the sky, Ayanna lay beside the fire, staring upward. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "why the storm brought me to your door?" Jacob poked the fire gently. "Maybe it was luck." She turned her head slightly toward him. "I do not believe in luck. I believe in paths that are meant to cross." Jacob looked at her, his voice quiet. "Then maybe it was meant to be." For a moment, their eyes met across the glow of the fire. Neither spoke, But something passed between them, something strong and wordless like the wind over the plains. The next morning, they began their journey again. Jacob wanted to take her north to the small settlement where a doctor and a few kind families lived. He thought it would be safer for her there, away from soldiers and trouble. They traveled slowly for 2 days. Ayanna rode better now, her strength returning, though her side still ached. They camped each night beneath the stars, sharing food stories and quiet laughter. But on the 3rd day, as they neared the hills, they heard horses in the distance. Jacob turned sharply, listening. The sound was faint but clear, riders, maybe 3 or 4, moving fast. His heart tightened. "They found us," he said quietly. Ayanna's face paled. "Soldiers?" He nodded. "Maybe. Stay close." He led her off the main trail into the woods. They moved quickly, weaving between trees until they reached a rocky ridge. The riders passed nearby but didn't see them. They waited, silent, until the sound of hooves faded. When it was safe, Ayanna looked at him. "You risk too much for me." Jacob shook his head. "I already told you. You're not a burden. You're my friend." She smiled gently. "Friend." She said the word as if testing it. "In my people's way, a true friend is like family. Once you save someone's life, your spirits are tied." Jacob looked at her quietly. "Then I guess we're tied, aren't we?" She nodded. "Forever." They continued north until the mountains opened into a valley filled with green fields and wildflowers. There, by the edge of a forest, stood a small cabin, old but strong. Jacob smiled faintly. "Used to be an old friend's place. No one lives here now. We can rest here till we figure things out." Ayanna looked around, amazed by the calm beauty of the place. The wind carried the scent of pine and blooming flowers. "It feels like the earth is breathing again," she said softly. Jacob built a fire and they unpacked what little they had left. As the sun set, painting the sky gold and orange, they sat on the porch side by side. The silence between them felt peaceful now, not lonely. Ayanna turned to him after a long time. "You saved me twice, Jacob. First from the storm, then from the soldiers. How can I ever repay you?" He shook his head. "You already have. You gave me something to live for." She smiled faintly. "Then we are even." He looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "No, Ayanna, not even. I think you gave me more than I can ever give back." For a while they said nothing more. The stars appeared one by one. Somewhere far off a wolf howled and the echo drifted through the valley. Ayanna looked up at the stars and whispered, "When the snow comes again, I will remember this place, the cabin, the fire, and the man who shared his warmth." Jacob smiled gently. "And I'll remember the woman who knocked on my door and changed everything." They both laughed softly, their eyes meeting once more. The bond between them was quiet but deep, built not from promises but from trust, kindness, and shared struggle. The wind grew colder that night, but they didn't feel it. The fire burned bright and the cabin glowed warm against the dark. And as dawn came, painting light over the valley, the lonely cowboy was lonely no more. Somewhere beyond words, he knew that even if their paths parted one day, they would never truly be apart. The storm had brought them together, but it was their hearts that kept them bound, two souls who had found warmth in a world that once felt frozen.